So do you ever feel like the more advanced our technology gets, the more exhausted you are just trying to survive?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it really is the defining paradox of our time. We have all these labor-saving devices, right?
Yeah.
But we are perpetually out of time and out of energy.
It is relentless. Like, think about a totally normal Tuesday. You wake up, you immediately check 3 different apps just to figure out what your workday looks like.
Right.
You are juggling all these multi-factor authenticators. You're managing, I don't know, 20 different subscription fees just to exist in the modern economy.
Yeah, just to keep the lights on.
Exactly. And you navigate this endless maze of automated customer service bots whenever something breaks. You work longer hours, you objectively produce way more output than your grandparents ever did, but somehow you just feel like you are constantly falling behind.
Well, the sensation is literally that you are running a marathon every single day at a full sprint, just to stay in the exact same financial spot.
Yes.
You aren't getting ahead at all. You are just barely avoiding slipping backward.
And the internal narrative we all have about this is just so punishing. You know, we constantly ask ourselves, like, is there something wrong with me?
Oh, totally. We personalize it.
We do. We think, am I just uniquely bad at managing my time? Have I just completely failed at modern laws? Why can't I optimize my routine enough to just feel 5 minutes of peace?
Well, the sources we are looking at for this deep dive suggest something entirely different, and it is going to blow your mind.
Okay, let's unpack this.
You are not failing. You aren't bad at time management. What you are feeling right now is a mathematical absolute.
Wait, a mathematical absolute?
Yeah, you are feeling the exact same crushing, invisible weight that broke the back of dead civilizations thousands of years ago.
Okay, hold on. Because that is a massive, almost absurd claim to make right out of the gate.
I know, it sounds crazy.
I mean, we are comparing my modern middle-class burnout, like my annoyance at having to update my phone software and pay my taxes, to the literal apocalyptic end of ancient empires.
We absolutely are, because the exact reason you feel burned out today was diagnosed by studying the graves of societies that thought they would last forever.
Whoa.
Today, we are doing a deep dive into an absolutely mind-bending book. It is Joseph Tainter's landmark work, The Collapse of Complex Societies.
And the central premise of Tainter's work essentially proves that the history books we all read in middle school just straight up lied to us.
Yeah, or at least they fundamentally misunderstood what they were looking at. They got the mechanics of human history totally wrong.
Because we were all taught the exact same dramatic stories, right? The magnificent Maya were wiped out by some mysterious sudden drought.
Right.
Or the mighty Roman Empire was just slaughtered by hordes of savage barbarians sweeping across the borders.
We have been completely conditioned to think of civilization death as a Hollywood blockbuster. You know, fire, brimstone, massive wars.
Earthquakes.
Exactly. A tragedy where everyone is running screaming through the streets as the marble pillars crumble around them.
But Tainter's data reveals that the real killer of these empires was entirely invisible.
It didn't use a single sword. It didn't fire a single arrow.
It is the exact same invisible force governing our tax brackets, our healthcare systems, our corporate bureaucracies, and your daily psychological stress right now.
Yes. So the first major delusion we need to dismantle here is what a collapse actually is.
Okay, lay it on me.
We always view collapse as a failure to survive. But Tainter argues that collapse is actually a highly rational, calculated choice.
Stop right there. I have to push back on that immediately. How on earth can destruction be a rational choice?
Well, think about it.
I mean, collapse means people losing their homes.
Yeah.
Institutions crumbling. Your standard of living dropping off a cliff. Nobody actively chooses that.
To understand why it is a choice, you have to completely reframe what you think a society actually is. A society isn't just a collection of buildings or a shared culture. At its core, a society is a machine built to solve problems.
Okay. Problem-solving machines. Like finding food or, defending against a neighboring tribe.
Precisely. And when early societies face a problem, they almost always solve it by doing one specific thing. They add a layer of something called complexity.
Let's ground this for a second. Walk me through a really tangible example of adding complexity to solve a problem.
Sure. Let's imagine a very simple early farming village, just a few dozen families, and they have a problem. Every spring, the river floods and ruins half their crops.
Okay, a localized, immediate crisis.
Right. So how do they solve it? They decide to build a dam and an irrigation canal.
Makes total sense. You control the water, you save the crops, you don't starve.
But building a dam is not something 3 farmers can just knock out on a Tuesday afternoon. It requires serious organization.
Right, you need a plan.
So the village has to elect or appoint a manager to oversee the whole project. They need someone with specialized knowledge to design the engineering. They need to organize labor schedules. And crucially, because the people building the dam aren't farming while they work, the rest of the village has to hand over extra grain to feed the builders.
Oh, wow. So to solve a simple flood, you have literally just invented a specialized engineering class, a management class, and a tax system.
Exactly. You added a distinct layer of complexity to your society. You added managers, specialists, and taxation. And guess what?
What?
It works.
Yeah.
The dam is built. The problem is solved. The village is safe from the flood, and they actually grow way more food than ever before.
So in this scenario, complexity is a phenomenal thing. It is literally the engine of human progress.
In the beginning, yes, it is incredibly effective. But here's the catch, and this is the core of everything we are going to talk about today. Complexity is never free.
It comes with a permanent price tag.
Every single new layer of society, like every new law you pass, every new official you appoint, every new specialized expert you train, requires constant energy and taxes to maintain.
It just permanently raises the floor.
Exactly. The baseline cost of just existing goes up for every single citizen.
It is the ultimate maintenance fee. You don't just build the dam once. You have to pay people to patch the dam every single year, forever.
Right. Now, early on, the return on that investment is massive. Tainter calls this the iron law of diminishing returns. And it applies to literally every organization in human history.
I love the lemon analogy for this. It makes it so clear.
Oh, yeah. Walk us through the lemon.
So it is like squeezing a lemon. Let's say you have a fresh lemon and you want some juice. You give it that first effortless squeeze.
High return. You get half a glass of juice for almost zero physical effort. That is, the village building one dam and doubling their crop yield.
But then you want a little more juice. So you squeeze the lemon a second time.
Right.
It takes a bit more muscle. You have to strain your hand a little bit. And you get less juice than the first time.
Your cost went up, more physical effort, but your return went down, less juice.
Exactly. So the village decides they want to increase crop yields again. So they build this massive, super complex network of terrace farming up a mountain.
And it takes 10 times the labor, but it only increases the yield by maybe 20%.
And by the time you get to the 10th squeeze of that lemon, your hand is violently cramping, your knuckles are turning white, you are sweating, you are putting in maximum physical exertion.
And what do you get?
You get exactly one bitter drop of juice.
That right there is the tragedy of complexity. No society on Earth is immune to that mathematical curve. Early on, adding a little bit of complexity pays off massively.
You hire one general, he organizes the militia, you win the war. Huge payoff.
But eventually, a society hits a peak. They have already solved all the easy problems. They have already squeezed all the easy juice out of their environment and their technology.
And once they hit that peak, the curve just drops off a cliff.
Adding more laws, more technology, and more experts suddenly costs an absolute fortune, but provides almost zero new benefits.
The sources have this fascinating data on agricultural labor that really brings this to life. It's not just some abstract economic theory.
No, it is hard data.
Tainter looks at historical farming records from places like Jamaica and northern Greece, and it perfectly maps onto that lemon analogy.
Yes, the agricultural data is just a perfect microcosm of this trap, because we naturally assume that if you work harder and implement more intense farming techniques, you get richer, right?
That is the whole American dream logic. Hard work equals more wealth.
But the data shows the exact opposite. In these regions, as the population pressure mounted, farmers had to shift from simple, easy farming to highly intensive farming.
Meaning, instead of just casually scattering seeds in a nice fertile valley, they're forced to literally carve terraces into steep mountainsides.
Right. They are meticulously pulling every single weed by hand. They're carrying heavy buckets of water up steep hills all day.
And did they get more food?
The absolute total amount of food they produced did go up, barely, which kept the society alive. But the marginal return, the amount of food they got per hour of human sweat, just plummeted.
They were working twice as hard just to get a 5% increase in calories.
They became trapped. Trapped in a system where immense back-breaking labor was required just to avoid starving to death. The society becomes a hollow shell.
It is desperately spending every ounce of energy just to maintain the status quo, just to keep the lights on.
And that is a terrifying place to be, because you are paying the maximum possible price just to stand completely still.
Okay, I hear you. But let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Because looking around at the modern world, it feels inherently different.
How so?
Well, we aren't subsistence farmers carving terraces into dirt. Shouldn't modern technology and science just invent us out of this trap?
Ah, the technology argument.
Yeah. I mean, if we have a problem today, we don't just work physically harder. We put a bunch of brilliant scientists in a multi-billion-dollar lab, and boom, they give us a technological miracle. We innovate our way out of diminishing returns.
Right. That is the grand illusion of the industrial age. It is the illusion of infinite progress. We firmly believe that human ingenuity is boundless, and therefore it is somehow immune to economics.
We feel like we're sprinting forward into this brilliant sci-fi future.
We are actually sprinting on a treadmill. It is an evolutionary biology concept called the Red Queen effect, named after the character in Alice in Wonderland who says, "It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place."
This is where the deep dive into the medical data absolutely stunned me. Because we think of modern medicine as this unstoppable rocket ship. Every week, there is a new headline about a breakthrough.
But if you actually look at the macroeconomic data, the narrative changes entirely. Let's look at the numbers for the United States. Around the year 1930, the society spent roughly 3% of its gross national product on healthcare.
3%. That is a very modest slice of the economic pie.
And for that 3% investment, the average life expectancy was about 59 years.
Okay, cheap investment, decent return. You get nearly 6 decades of life for a tiny fraction of the economy.
Now fast forward half a century to 1982. The society is now spending over 10% of a vastly larger gross national product on healthcare.
So the cost has effectively tripled in terms of the total economic percentage. And the pie itself is astronomically bigger. We are throwing absolute mountains of wealth at medicine.
And the life expectancy, it rose to 74 years.
Wait, so we spent an exponentially larger fortune to gain, what, 15 extra years?
Exactly. We conquered the easy diseases first. We grabbed all the low-hanging fruit, basic sanitation, penicillin, vaccines for polio.
That was the first squeeze of the medical lemon. Massive leaps in human lifespan for pennies on the dollar. You figure out that washing your hands stops infection, and suddenly millions of people don't die.
But the diseases that are left today, they were the 10th squeeze of the lemon. Curing them, or even just managing them, requires unbelievable sums of money.
The sources explicitly point to the emergence of these highly complex chronic conditions, things like advanced oncology or Alzheimer's.
We aren't spending billions to give everyone another 20 healthy years of life anymore. We are spending billions building incredibly complex pharmacological supply chains just to eke out a few more months.
Or just to prevent life expectancy from actively dropping.
Yes. Every single extra day of life we try to buy as a society now costs exponentially more than the day before. The marginal productivity of our medical investment is plummeting.
And it is not just medicine. You see the exact same Red Queen effect in scientific innovation across the board. The data on patent applications just completely shatters how we think about human genius.
People naturally assume that more scientists equal more breakthroughs. It seems like super simple math.
Right. The logic is, if one guy in a garage with a kite and a key can discover electricity, then 1,000 guys in a billion-dollar lab should be able to invent teleportation.
But the exact opposite happens. The number of people engaged in scientific research over the last century has exploded. It has gone up exponentially. We have more PhDs alive right now than in the rest of human history combined.
But the efficiency of those scientists, the number of groundbreaking patents generated per researcher, it has dropped off a cliff.
Because the simple laws of physics have already been discovered. You cannot discover gravity twice.
You can't discover thermodynamics twice.
Exactly. To make a genuinely new, paradigm-shifting discovery today, you don't need a lone genius with an apple falling on his head. You need a $10 billion particle accelerator buried beneath 2 countries.
You need a team of 5,000 hyper-specialized physicists working for 20 years just to prove one subatomic particle exists for a fraction of a second.
More effort, vastly more money, fewer practical breakthroughs. The cost of maintaining our scientific complexity is just staggering.
And it gets even worse when you look at the bureaucracy required to manage all this complexity, because complex institutions have this built-in survival mechanism that makes diminishing returns accelerate.
Self-accumulation. Bureaucracies never ever shrink. They only know how to grow.
You brought up this incredible statistic from the sources about the British Navy. It perfectly illustrates this mechanic. We always assume bureaucracy grows because the actual job gets bigger.
But the data proves the bureaucracy grows even when the job completely disappears.
It is wild. Walk us through the Navy numbers.
It is a fascinating case study. Look at the British Royal Navy between the years 1914 and 1967. Over that roughly 50-year period, the British Navy's number of capital ships, the actual battleships, the core physical fighting force, decreased by roughly 80%.
So the physical empire was shrinking dramatically. They went from ruling the waves globally to a massive contraction. The actual fighting force was practically disappearing.
But what happened to the Admiralty officials? The managers, the clerks, the desk officers sitting in London?
Their numbers exploded. They increased by a factor of 10.
The fighting fleet vanished, but the administrative bureaucracy multiplied by 10.
But how does that even happen? Like, how do you justify hiring 10 times as many managers to oversee 20% of the ships? What are they all doing all day?
This is the insidious nature of complexity. As technology advanced, with the integration of radio, global telegraph networks, complex logistics, the amount of information generated skyrocketed.
So even with fewer ships, the coordination required became vastly more complicated.
Yes. And crucially, once a bureaucracy reaches a certain critical mass, it stops primarily solving external problems. It has to spend massive resources solving the internal problems created by its own existence.
Oh, wow. It becomes a snake eating its own tail.
Exactly. You hire a committee to oversee radio logistics. That committee generates weekly reports. Now you need a secondary committee to review those reports.
Then you need an auditing department to ensure the two committees are communicating properly.
Right. Regulators write new administrative rules. People find loopholes in those rules, so regulators hire more people to write more rules to close the loopholes.
It is an endless, self-feeding loop of administrative bloat, and someone has to pay the daily maintenance cost for all those desk jobs, all those filing cabinets, all that overhead.
And who pays for it? The taxpayer. The everyday citizen at the bottom of the pyramid. The burden of maintaining the system keeps growing, while the actual tangible benefits they receive from the state freeze or even shrink.
Which brings us, inevitably, to Rome. When you talk about crushing taxation, sprawling empires, and the lethal weight of bureaucracy, you have to talk about the Roman Empire.
It is the ultimate historical cautionary tale of diminishing returns.
Because I think most of us have this mental image of Rome at its peak. We picture those massive maps in our history textbooks, Roman borders stretching from the misty hills of Britain all the way down to the deserts of the Middle East.
And we think, wow, look at that success. They won the game of civilization.
Exactly. But it is so vital that we flip that script completely today. That map is not a picture of a sustainable, thriving golden age.
Not at all. That map is a picture of an empire desperately trying to outrun bankruptcy. Rome's greatest territorial expansion was essentially a countdown to its suicide.
Okay, explain that, because it sounds totally backward.
To understand why, you have to look at how Rome actually funded itself. Early Rome, during the period of rapid expansion, funded its incredible growth not through internal productivity, but by looting conquered lands.
It operated almost like a geopolitical Ponzi scheme.
Yes, a massive external energy subsidy. You march your legions into a neighboring territory, you defeat them, you steal all their accumulated gold and silver.
You enslave hundreds of thousands of their people to work your fields for free.
And you use that massive influx of stolen wealth to build your glorious marble city back home. It was squeezing a very profitable, albeit incredibly violent, lemon.
The return on investment for an early Roman military campaign was astronomical. They were absorbing the wealth of entire centuries of other civilizations' labor in a matter of months.
But you can only play that game for so long. Eventually, they hit the geographic limits of the ancient world. They hit the Atlantic Ocean. They hit the Sahara Desert.
They hit those fierce, mobile tribes in the dense forests of Germania, where massive legions couldn't maneuver, and there were no rich cities to loot.
They ran out of easily conquered neighbors, the expansion ground to a halt. But here is the fatal flaw. The costs didn't stop. In fact, they skyrocketed.
Because once you stop expanding, you now have this massive, sprawling, static border that stretches for thousands of miles. And you can't just leave it empty.
No, you have to defend it. You need a gargantuan standing army stationed permanently on the frontier. You need an army of bureaucrats, tax collectors, and administrators just to manage the logistics of feeding those legions across a continent.
You have built a hyper-complex empire, and now you have to pay the daily, grinding maintenance cost of keeping it intact, without any more free loot coming in to pay for it.
The external subsidy is gone, so where does the money come from? It has to come out of their own internal economy. From the pockets of Roman citizens, primarily the agricultural output of the peasantry.
And the cold, hard mathematical truth is they simply couldn't afford it. The internal economy of the ancient world was just not productive enough to sustain the administrative and military bloat of the empire.
So what do leaders do when they face a structural deficit they cannot possibly pay? They do what almost every failing complex society does. They cheat.
Let's walk through the exact mechanics of this, because the timeline of the Roman currency, the devaluation of the denarius, is one of the most shocking pieces of data in all of human history.
The denarius was the workhorse of the Roman economy. A silver coin. It was the backbone of trade. People trusted it because it had real, intrinsic value.
But then Emperor Nero comes along.
Mm-hmm.
He looks at the state treasury. It's dangerously low. He has massive bills to pay, particularly for the military, and he can't raise taxes enough without triggering a massive revolt.
So he institutes a silent tax. He melts down the existing coins, keeps some of the silver for the state, and mints new coins mixed with cheap base metals. He drops the silver content to roughly 90%.
To a Roman citizen in the market, it doesn't seem like a big deal. The coin looks mostly the same.
Right, it's a quick fix. It allows the state to print more money and just get through the fiscal year.
But the underlying structural stress, the overwhelming cost of complexity, doesn't go away. In fact, it gets worse. A few decades later, Emperor Trajan needs to fund his massive campaigns. He looks at the math, and he drops the silver content to 85%.
And the cycle accelerates. The costs keep rising.
Then we get to Septimius Severus. To secure his throne, he desperately needs the absolute loyalty of the legions. He literally tells his sons, enrich the soldiers and scorn all other men. He massively increases troop pay.
And to afford that astronomical expense, he slashes the silver content of the denarius down to 50%. Half pure silver, half cheap bronze.
At this point, the trust in the currency is actively breaking. Merchants aren't stupid. They can feel the difference in the weight. They see the color changing.
So his son, Emperor Caracalla, takes over. He needs even more money. He realizes the denarius is so debased that the public is losing faith in it entirely.
So what is his brilliant solution? He literally invents a whole new coin just to mask the inflation. He introduces the Antonianus. He legally mandates that it is worth 2 denarii, but it actually contains only 1.5 times the silver.
It is a state-sponsored scam. The empire is fundamentally insolvent at this point. They are printing fake money to pay real soldiers to defend a border they can no longer afford to maintain.
And the plunge continues. By the time we get to Emperor Gallienus in the mid-3rd century, the coins have less than 5% silver.
They are basically worthless bronze chips with a microscopic silver wash that literally rubs off on your fingers when you handle them.
The government has officially gone bankrupt. They are cannibalizing the wealth of their own citizens just to pay for the emergencies of the present.
And the result of this massive currency debasement is hyperinflation on a scale that is genuinely hard to comprehend. Tainter highlights the tax records from Roman Egypt, and the spike is terrifying.
We literally have the receipts. In the 1st century, a measure of wheat in Egypt cost roughly 6 drachmae, a completely manageable, stable price.
Fast forward to the year 334 AD, after centuries of debasement. That exact same measure of wheat skyrocketed to 2 million drachmae.
From 6 to 2 million. The money became entirely meaningless. People had to cart wheelbarrows of worthless bronze coins just to buy a loaf of bread. Trade collapsed back to simple bartering.
So the question becomes, how did the Roman emperors try to fix this terminal decline? Did they look at the crushing cost of the empire, realize the marginal returns were negative, and decide to simplify?
Did they voluntarily pull back the borders, shrink the army, and reduce the bureaucracy?
No, because remember the trap of complexity. It is almost impossible for an entrenched system to voluntarily undo itself. The bureaucracy will not fire itself.
Instead, Emperor Diocletian steps in. And in a desperate attempt to save the empire, he administers what is basically poison to the system.
Diocletian responds to the crisis by enforcing a regime of extreme totalitarian state control. The complexity becomes coercive.
He issues the edict on maximum prices, threatening the death penalty for anyone charging more than the state-mandated price for goods. which of course just drives all trade into the black market. But more terrifyingly, he freezes people in their professions.
To ensure that the state continues to get the specific goods and services it needs to survive, Diocletian essentially eliminates social mobility. If your father was a baker, you must be a baker. You are locked in by law.
Wait, so he literally locked them in their jobs?
Yes. If you are a tenant farmer, a colonist, you are legally bound to the dirt you work. You cannot move. You cease to be a free citizen with agency. You become a biological gear in a failing machine.
And the taxation becomes absolutely ruthless. They send tax collectors into the provincial villages with whips and soldiers. Farmers are forced to hand over virtually an entire harvest just to feed the bloated military in the capital.
And this brings us to one of the most profound paradigm shifts in the entire deep dive. This completely changes how we understand the fall of Rome.
Rome wasn't murdered by barbarians. Rome committed suicide.
The traditional narrative of the savage barbarians destroying a shining, prosperous civilization is largely a romantic myth. The truth is, the taxes and the state coercion became so incredibly crushing that Roman citizens actively welcomed the barbarians.
Think about the pure, rational math of a Roman peasant living on the border. You are chronically starving. The state takes almost all the food you grow. You are legally bound to the dirt. If you can't pay your tax debts, your children are literally sold into slavery by the state. You have zero freedom, zero wealth, and zero hope.
Then, a Germanic barbarian tribe crosses the border. The Romans call them savages. But look at their society. They don't have a massive, suffocating bureaucracy. They don't have a giant standing army that demands half your harvest.
Their society is incredibly simple, which means their tax rate is virtually zero.
Exactly. So the Roman peasant does the math. It was literally cheaper, safer, and infinitely more liberating to be a conquered subject under a barbarian warlord than to be a free Roman taxpayer under Diocletian.
The system's marginal returns had turned massively negative. The cost of being Roman vastly exceeded the benefits of Roman protection.
The empire dissolved because its people at the local level rationally chose to stop paying for it. When the barbarians arrived, the local populations didn't fight back. In many cases, they opened the gates.
They let the central empire fall because the local society needed the empire to die so they could survive. Collapse wasn't a tragedy for the peasant. Collapse was a rescue mission.
It is deeply unsettling because it shows how a society can become a prison of its own making.
But, we might think, okay, maybe Rome was a unique case. Maybe they just had bad emperors. But state coercion only works if you have a geography that allows for outside forces to step in. What happens when a society is geographically trapped? Let's shift completely across the world to the jungles of Central America. The Maya.
A completely different environment, a completely different culture, no contact whatsoever with the Mediterranean world, but they fell victim to the exact same mathematical curse of complexity.
The Maya are fascinating because they seemingly had it all. Incredible high art, precise calendars, massive towering stone cities rising out of the dense rainforest.
They built a highly complex, intensely hierarchical civilization.
And then the archaeological record shows this terrifying cliff. In just a few decades, they largely vanish. A population that was thriving at around 3 million people plummets down to maybe 450,000. It is a demographic avalanche. Why? Did a sudden mega drought just instantly wipe them out?
The drought theory is popular, but again, Tainter points to the underlying vulnerability, the cost of complexity. The Maya faced a brutal geographical trap. Their population was booming, but their available agricultural land was strictly limited by the encroaching jungle.
A finite pie of resources, with more mouths to feed every year.
So what do the Mayan elites do as the stress builds? Do they recognize the limits, simplify their society, and disperse?
No. Just like Diocletian, they double down on complexity.
They pour all their remaining dwindling energy into two incredibly expensive endeavors: relentless, escalating warfare with neighboring city-states and massive monumental construction.
It seems like madness. Your people are struggling to grow enough corn, the soil is depleting, and the elites decide the solution is to force the starving peasant class to drag multi-ton limestone blocks through the sweltering jungle to build an even taller pyramid. Why?
Because, from the perspective of a ruling class facing a crisis, it makes a twisted kind of sense. They are desperately trying to assert control. They believe that by building grander temples, they can appease the gods and bring back the rains.
And here's the brutal irony of the Mayan collapse. We can track the exact timeline of their desperation using their own carved stone monuments, the stelae, which they dated meticulously.
The data tells a flawless, terrifying story.
If you look at a graph mapping the number of monuments built against the timeline of their civilization, the exact moment the Maya built the absolute highest number of their magnificent stone monuments, the very peak of their architectural glory around the year 790 A.D., was the exact moment their civilization's death knell rang. The lines cross. Maximum complexity intersects with the beginning of the demographic freefall.
Because those monuments provided absolutely zero actual survival value. You cannot eat a stone pyramid.
The elites squeezed the absolute last drop from the societal lemon, and the system simply snapped.
The peasants physically couldn't support the weight of the elite class anymore, so the complexity shattered. The elites were overthrown or abandoned, and the population suffered a horrific starvation event.
It wasn't a sudden drought that killed them. It was the fact that their society had become so rigidly complex that any minor stress became a fatal blow.
We see a very similar dynamic with a society much closer to home. The Chacoans in the American Southwest.
Chaco Canyon.
Yeah.
They built this brilliant, highly complex regional network of great houses.
It's a masterful example of a society using complexity to solve an environmental problem. The Chacoans lived in a harsh, arid environment. Rainfall was totally erratic. So they engineered a massive interconnected web of communities with an incredible system of engineered roads.
The underlying logic was brilliant. It was a regional insurance policy. If my village experiences a drought but your village gets rain, the road network allows you to share your surplus corn with me.
But once again, coordinating this massive network wasn't free.
You need administrators. You need massive amounts of labor to constantly maintain these wide roads against erosion. You have to haul massive timber beams from mountains 50 miles away just to build the administrative centers.
Over time, the overhead costs of simply running the insurance policy ate up all the profits.
So what happens when a massive, severe, prolonged regional drought hits the area around 1130 AD? It doesn't just hit one valley, it hits everyone.
If we follow the traditional narrative, we would assume they fought a bloody civil war over water and then starved. But they didn't. They were rational actors. They looked at the cost-benefit ratio of this giant, energy-intensive regional system.
They realized that trying to maintain the administration and the great houses during a drought was actively bankrupting them.
Living simply breaking apart into small, isolated, mobile bands of farmers was suddenly economically superior to maintaining a massive, complex society.
So they just walked away. They systematically abandoned the great houses. The collapse of the Chacoan system wasn't a failure to survive. The collapse was their survival strategy.
They voluntarily downgraded their complexity because the marginal returns had gone entirely negative.
Okay, looking at Rome, the Maya, and Chaco Canyon, this brings up what I think is the most obvious screaming question for anyone listening to this deep dive. If adding complexity eventually kills you, why didn't these emperors and high priests just hit the brakes?
It is the ultimate tragedy of human history, the inability to stop.
Why not just look around during a golden age and say, hey, things are pretty good. The empire's a manageable size. Let's just stay here. No more expansion.
Because you can't. The fundamental blind spot of mainstream history is assuming that a society ever gets to rest. We assume stability is the default. But in reality, stress surges never, ever stop.
Unpredictable, unavoidable chaos. A bad harvest. A new nomadic tribe on the border. A pandemic.
To survive the immediate existential threat of today, you have to build a new layer of complexity. You literally have no choice.
You solve today's emergency by making tomorrow's daily maintenance cost permanently higher. You survive the battle, but you push yourself one step closer to the economic cliff.
A disaster only destroys a society when that society has already hollowed itself out with the crushing costs of hypercomplexity. When you are spending 99% of your energy just maintaining the status quo, a 2% drain caused by a drought is fatal.
The disaster isn't the lumberjack swinging the axe. The disaster is just a mild breeze that pushes over a tree that is already completely hollowed out by termites.
The internal decay always precedes the external shock. Always.
All right, this is the part of the deep dive where the history lesson ends, and we hold up an incredibly uncomfortable mirror to our own time. What does this all mean for us? For the person commuting to their hyper-specialized job right now?
We look around at our modern world and we naturally assume we are defying the iron law. We are the most hyper-complex society in history. Global supply chains, satellite networks, and the system hasn't collapsed.
It is deeply comforting to think we are the exception. We want to believe our science and computing power have made us immune.
But we haven't beaten the rule. We just found a temporary cheat code that delayed the inevitable.
A cheat code.
The discovery and exploitation of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. We stumbled upon an unimaginably massive, buried treasure of concentrated solar energy.
This massive injection of cheap energy has temporarily masked the crushing cost of our hypercomplexity. We could afford to build endless layers of middle management and global shipping networks because the energy powering the machine was so incredibly cheap.
Think of it like finding a magical credit card with a seemingly limitless balance. You start living an incredibly lavish, complex lifestyle. You feel invincible, but you aren't actually generating that wealth. You are just drawing down a finite account.
And the bill eventually comes due, because the cost of extracting new energy is also subject to the iron law of diminishing returns.
100 years ago, you could stick a shallow pipe in the dirt in Texas, and high-quality crude oil would literally shoot into the sky. High return, incredibly low cost, the first squeeze of the fossil fuel lemon.
But today, we have picked all that low-hanging fruit. We are building multi-billion-dollar platforms in the freezing waters of the North Sea. We are mining tar sands in Canada, which requires massive amounts of natural gas just to heat the sludge enough to move it.
The amount of energy required just to extract the next barrel of energy is going up exponentially. We are bound by the ultimate physics shackle. There is no such thing as infinite free energy.
And here is the most chilling part. When the Romans couldn't afford their empire, they stopped expanding. When the Chacoans couldn't afford their network, they walked away into the desert. We don't have those options.
We are out of frontiers. The globe is completely filled. Our incredibly intricate, hyper-globalized system covers the entire planet. We are completely interlocked.
If a single computer chip factory in Taiwan has a fire, you literally cannot buy a car in Detroit. The complexity is so rigid that there are no localized safe havens.
If our global system hits that undeniable point of negative marginal returns, there are no unconquered lands left to loot. And crucially, there are no empty, simple spaces left to retreat to.
You cannot simply opt out of the complex grid. You have to pay property taxes, you have to have a bank account. We are locked into the machine.
Think about your own life again. The endless subscription services that bleed your bank account, the staggering bureaucratic red tape at your job, the soaring cost of housing and medical care.
That profound, exhausting feeling that you have to run a marathon every single day just to stay in the exact same financial spot.
What if that modern anxiety isn't a psychological feeling on your part at all?
What if that exhaustion you feel in your bones is the exact same mathematical weight that crushed the Roman peasant? The exact same invisible pressure of diminishing returns that broke the Mayan farmer.
The iron law of diminishing returns doesn't care about our iPhones or our space stations. It is an inescapable law of thermodynamics. It dictates how structures consume energy. And right now, the data suggests it is consuming us.
We look at our towering skyscrapers and our digital lives, and we point to them as proof of our permanence. We think, look how complex we are. We must be immortal.
But based on the cold, hard data of human history, we have to ask a terrifying question. Are these hyper-complex systems truly our triumphs? Or are they our undoing?
I'll leave you with this final thought to mull over. Right now, the entire world is racing to build artificial intelligence. We are told AI will be the ultimate efficiency tool, the technology that finally saves us from our own complexity. But to build it, we are constructing massive data centers that consume the electricity of entire nations. We are adding the most energy-intensive, opaque layer of complexity in human history. Are we building the tool that will save our civilization? Or, in our desperate attempt to manage our failing systems, are we just stacking the biggest, most expensive Mayan monuments the world has ever seen, right before the end?